fourth. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth of 6 workshops that have been facilitated and will be facilitated by members of Peach. More about Peach in a moment. And we like to begin each of our workshops with a land acknowledgement by Dr. Sandy K1-Haptewa, and I'll ask Bob to facilitate and thank you.
Okay.
Dixon, no hopitu, no more copy, no dawa, no so. Thank you. My name is Sandy Konaptewa Dixon. As she said, I'm from the Hopi Nation. I'm from the village of Mokope, and I am San Clan. I'm also a so'o, which is most important is the role of a grandmother. Thank you so much for the invitation of joining your organization today. I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgement and in reference to a California land acknowledgement that we also use at Cal Poly Pomona. We recognize that we gather on the territorial and ancestral lands of Native California Indians. Cal Poly Pomona and other places acknowledge the LaTanga people as the traditional land caretakers of Tavangar, the Los Angeles Basin, and South Channel Islands. We also acknowledge that this land remains shared space among the Kizh, the Serrano, Cahuilla, Rumsen Ohlone, and Liseño people. We acknowledge the spiritual connection and rights as the original stewards and traditional caretakers of this land. We thank them for their strength, perseverance, and resistance. We recognize that every member of this community has and continues to benefit from the use and the occupation of this land ever since it was taken by the land-grabbing settlers to form the cities we now live and work in. Consistent with our values of reparations, community, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible our relationship as settlers in relationship to California Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold ourselves and the organizations we work on behalf of more attuned to the needs of American Indian Native American peoples where we live, work, and organize. Escalate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sandy. We welcome Dr. Sandy to each of our workshops, and we're grateful for the land acknowledgement. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. I'm Martine Jago. I work at Pepperdine University. We're very glad you're here, and we hope that you'll put your name and affiliation in the chat box. There will also be prompts for you to complete in this early part of the session this evening. Over the past few months and the next couple of months, we've had the opportunity and will have the opportunity to learn and share together through a series of 6 two-hour workshops on language acquisition and literacy development in young dual language and multi-language learners 0 to 8 years of age. Tonight, we are focusing specifically on facilitating language and literacy in linguistically diverse communities. And everyone working behind the scenes today is a Peach member. So who and what is Peach? Peach is an early childhood higher education collaborative. We are truly cross-sector in California, and we work across private universities, community colleges, Cal States, and University of California institutions. We're delighted that you can join us, and if you'd like to hear more, please don't hesitate to contact us. Either send us a note in chat or write to us at Peach. Barb Rosner will be happy to hear from you. I'd also like to mention that Barb and Nancy Hurlbert are behind the scenes, and I want to thank them before we start this evening, because without them, none of us will be able to see the PowerPoints or have our audio and sound and video working well. So thank you, Barb, and thank you, Nancy. I'd like to thank especially Andy Sanders and LaTanga Hardy, who are Peach members, participants, and have been for some time. They are working with us this evening to guide our thinking and help us take next steps. I do have a brief word about the Dr. Seuss Foundation. We applied for a grant. We are in receipt of a reasonably sized grant from the Dr. Seuss Foundation. We're working in partnership with them. We were selected as a recipient of the grant to conduct these training sessions for trainers of early childhood specialists in multilingual, multicultural development through an anti-racist lens. Peach team members, and you see them on the screen this evening, have developed and are offering these workshops for higher education faculty in the field of early childhood and or child development throughout California on language acquisition and literacy development in multilingual classrooms. These workshops build on your faculty strengths. We acknowledge that you have prior knowledge and we work with adult learning approaches. So let's say a little bit about Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss books such as Green Eggs and Ham and The Cat in the Hat resonate for children and adults and have done for more than 30 years since the author's death in 1991. Theodore Seuss Geisel was born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts. His books have been translated into many languages, including Braille, and are sold in over 100 countries. Dr. Seuss Enterprises have decided that 6 Dr. Seuss books are no longer to be published due to racist images and culturally insensitive content. Further, Dr. Seuss Enterprises has reported that an inclusive group of new authors and artists representing a diverse cross-section of the population will create a new series of children's books that include original stories inspired by original Dr. Seuss sketches from archives at the University of California here in San Diego. In this way, Geisel's legacy of motivating young readers, writers, and artists can continue with illustrated tales firmly focused in anti-bias and anti-racism going forward. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'll pass the baton to Ande and LaTanga, who will guide us through the rest of the evening until 8 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you.
Thank you. You do the next slide, please, Nancy.
Dual language learners in ECE. Next slide, please. Welcome, everyone. So I want you to think back and think of a time when you attended an event where the language that was spoken was not a language that you're familiar with. So maybe you attended a wedding that was in a language that's unfamiliar, some other kind of celebration, some learning. Classroom experience, or just something where you experience where it's not the language that you're familiar with. And think of how that made you feel. So as educators, how can this experience help you as an educator assess your own welcoming strategies? I will give my share. I attended a wedding and the language was not English. And how I was able to gather is how we talk when we talk to children about children are observant, right? They're observing their world around them. So I was able to see when it was time to stand up because everybody else stood up, and see when it was time to sit down, right? And see when it was time to get on my knees, because I truly did not know the language that the minister or the priest was speaking in. Didn't know it at all. But I got my cues from those around me. And so we think of when we have children, students, whether it be preschool children, college students, who are not familiar with the language. And how do we make them feel welcome in that environment? So we have to look at what we call a coordinated approach. So a coordinated approach to ensure optimal language and literacy services for all children. Next slide, please. So one of the things we have to look at is our classroom language model. And so what I have here is an example of a dual language classroom language model. So what languages do the children bring to the classroom? When we come into the classroom, many of the children speak one language, and many other children speak English, and a small number of children may speak English and a third language. I shared recently that I was in Africa for the first time, and most of the children, when I attended several elementary schools, spoke multiple languages. They were speaking 4 or 5 languages. And so when we think about our Western world, how we typically have put a standard on English is that language. When we go abroad, we see that people speak multiple languages. So when we're talking about inviting children in the classroom, we talked about welcoming, right? How are we welcoming people that don't speak the language or not as familiar with the language? How do we welcome them into that classroom or that school environment? Sorry, my computer is dinging a lot. We have to think back of what we would like to be, how we like to feel welcomed in the classroom, right? How would I have liked to have been welcomed in that wedding setting when I shared about going to a wedding where no one's, the minister and everyone was not speaking a language that I was familiar with. So what language do the teaching staff bring? When we think of the teaching staff, the teachers are both fluent and strong language models in both languages. So for example, I have on here English and Spanish, or one teacher is fluent in English and one teacher is fluent in Spanish. And some in this model, the teachers can agree to operate the goal of operating on a 50-50, where the language is spoken in both, in English and Spanish, or in English and Farsi, whatever that other language is. And so what are the language, instruction, and communication? There are 2 languages of instruction in this model. Each language is spoken during designated, equal, and predictable times. So when that early educator is sharing with those children, she or he is speaking in both languages or multiple languages, okay? Lessons are taught with the same amount of review and context sharing needed to connect children's thinking from one day to the next as children move out. So we're going through that. When you go back and think about that Head Start model, a plan, do, review, how teacher would plan and be intentional in their planning, and how they would do an activity and how they would review the activity. So when we're talking about with language and children and sharing, we're thinking of all of that goes into working with children and dual language or multiple language learners. Next slide, please. So what I have here also is a planned language approach. I run a child care center, so we have to think about how, for example, what would be my mission, right, of making sure that I am welcoming all children of all languages, right? What school readiness goals would I have for dual language learners? And so this is just one slide that shows things that can go into making sure that we're trying to ensure that we are creating a welcome environment for all children. So our classroom language models, language and culture questionnaire. So when children come into the program and families come into the program, we have a questionnaire for them to complete. And we have it in multiple languages for them to complete. We make sure that the handbook is written in a language that they can understand. We talk about, and we're going to get more into our environment and labeling and the importance of labeling the classroom. We're going to talk about more about oral language, family engagement, and making sure we're engaging families, that we're creating that welcoming environment, and we truly see them as the child's first teacher. Child's language assessments and professional development that we provide our educators. Next slide, please. So that planned language approach, how we're planning to support children who speak multiple or dual language. So dual language learners, family supports. it deals with family supports, environmental supports, and instructional supports. So with regard to our family supports, it's not uncommon, as we said, that the teacher might speak only one language. But what we need to do is we need to ensure that we are sharing. Excuse me. Moving down. That we share with the family the social and emotional rules of the classroom, that we're sharing with parents what our goals are for the children, but more importantly, that we're asking the questions and finding out what they want for children. So in previous Head Start, but going back to Head Start, just as one model, doing those home visits before a child attends the first day of school, or having that time where if it's in the classroom before school starts, but having that time to get to know that family, asking those questions of what languages do they speak at the home? What goals do they have for their children? What cultural holidays do they celebrate or do they not celebrate? What eating patterns or things that they eat or that maybe they're not allowed to eat? But just that getting to know you activity, that building that relationship with families is so very valuable and important so that we are better able to serve that child. So we got to take time to get to know each child and family individually so that you can start the school year and make sure that you're meeting the needs. You want to make sure that you're asking parents to translate words that will help in in meeting the needs of children. So asking questions about words, typical words about going to the bathroom, telling you when they want to eat, things of those sort, that those basic need questions that you're able to communicate with the child and with the family. I think I shared in another workshop, one of the things and my love for working with dual language learners came from elementary school, and my best friend at the time in third grade, who had just moved to our elementary school, and her name was Anna Reyes. And her name is Anna Reyes. Anna did not speak any English. And so the teacher, very smart, paired her with me or paired her with the child, right? So that we could start communicating. So she would sort of follow me around, and we got our own way of communicating. And she would teach me things in Spanish, and I would teach her things in English. And this was the 70s, so I'm dating myself to go back. But the teacher said to Anna one day, "Cállate la boca," or shut up your mouth. And I didn't know at that time what the teacher had said to her. I did know that it made my friend upset from her facial expressions. Then we talk about reading cues, right? Do I think at that time my teacher meant to say something that maybe would seem offensive? No, I think she probably asked for how to be quiet, but this is what maybe was told to her how to say, "Can you be quiet?" or "Please be quiet." But I did take from that cue that my friend was upset, so then I became upset, right? So this is why it's important to ask parents words that should be communicated with the child, so that you're able to say them and you're able to practice them, so that you give the best to the child and happy to communicate. Asking words, them to translate words about like happy, sad, those emotional cue words that are also very important. The other thing on here is our environmental support, established with regard to establishing a welcoming environment. What does our bulletin boards look like? Are they diverse? What music are we playing in the classroom? Is it multicultural and diverse? Displaying multicultural images in books and communicating to families that cultural diversity is valued in the classroom, right? Because what we see around our classrooms or what we see on the walls, right? If I would go to your home, what I would see on, if you pictures you put on your wall, that will be important to you, right? So when you go into a classroom, what we put on the walls in our classroom, we're saying those things are important. or those things have value because they're not in the drawer, right? They're put up on a bulletin board. So when we put something on a bulletin board, we have to make sure, what is that communicating? How is that creating a welcoming environment? And how might people interpret what is placed on a board? Because it's not in our drawer, it's placed on a bulletin board where everyone can see, right? So it must be of value, because if it's placed on a board, if it's a picture in a frame that I have that you see when you walk into your home, it must be of value. Also, instructional supports. Frame diversity as a strength. We know that children come to our classrooms. We know that children come to our classrooms and to our school environment with lots of different abilities, lots of different languages, and lots of different family units. And so we have to look at that as a strength. Some of the things that we can do with our instructional support is think, pair, share. Self-portraits, making sure that we're labeling the classroom. Making sure that we're modeling, right? When I talked about going to church and standing up, sitting down, getting on my knees, they were modeling. I took the cues, I followed along, right? During transition times in the classroom, build language. For example, you can say, everyone touch your head, and then you can say it in another language. Can everyone hop on one foot? We're all going to hop on one foot to get in line. We're all going to do whatever it is, right? Or songs, and include songs that you're repeating and that are in multiple language, so that everyone's voice is heard. When we're talking about dual language learning, it's really about making sure all voices are heard and not using that subtractive schooling thinking where we're looking at the dual language or the other language, someone would say, as a deficit and looking at it as a deficit model. Next slide, please. Teachers ask families. So we talked about previously that getting to know you, taking that time to get to know your families, talking to them as best you can in their language, if possible. You know, there's so many avenues now for language and learning a new language. But we also want to make sure that when we're sending items home to parents, that we're sending items home in the child's language or in a language that the parents can understand. Some things that teachers are doing also is they're communicating and they're doing the notebook, where the notebook goes home every day, where the teachers write something, the parents, and they're able to communicate that way. Some teachers do a monthly newsletter or a weekly newsletter of what's going on, and find other ways to communicate and ensure that families' voices are heard. So you'll see on this, talk to your families in language in the child's class. Next slide, please. So teachers meet with families to collect detailed information on the children's language, experiences, and cultural backgrounds, ensuring that we're welcoming that cultural background. Just because we fill out the sheet and I've got your information, as an educator, if I don't go back to it, oh, but I have it. And making sure that it's not something just on a checklist, but it's something that we're using to support the child, while also ensuring that we're supporting that family. Next slide, please. So here is the famous family language and culture interview. It's actually 2 pages, but this is the time when we ask those questions to get to know the families, get to know the languages they speak, get to know who else is in the family. Do they live with grandma? Do they live with aunts? Do they live, in an apartment? Do they live, what books do they like? It's all those family language and culture and getting to know that family. So getting that background information you're able to better support the family once you have that information. We take it and we ensure that we're using it, right? Next slide, please. I added the poll, personal oral language learning. The poll includes familiar strategies that have been put together in a unique way to ensure that our approach is comprehensive and is comprehensive and systematic in providing social, emotional, cognitive, and language support for dual language learners throughout the day. And this is from Fresno Unified School District, who was great in making the poll with Cariola. And so I added poll strategies, but it's that personal oral language learning. I'm going to give you an example. Let's go to the next slide. So it's the poll strategies it's looking for words and chants that you would include in the daily language working with children. So vocabulary words, being intentional with your message is all part of poll. And so here's just an example of a teacher would send home the chant. You'll see that you'll notice that it's in English and into what? Spanish, right? So you'll notice that it's in multiple languages, in dual language. You'll see that there are pictures, right? Because one of the important thing is when you're sharing with your classroom, making sure it's a welcoming environment, that you don't just have the words, that you have a picture also to represent. One of the hiccups, we just hired a new teacher, and hopefully she's not online, so I think I can share this. We just hired a new educator at the center. She has the 1-year-old class, and she had classroom rules posted, right? She's teaching the 1-year-olds. 1-year-olds. Classroom rules written. Who's reading that? They're 1, right? So when you think about it, you think like, oh, but that's all still part of it, right? Where's the visual? If you wanted this to be the language, where's the visual of representing what you would like to see? So it's really important to have that visual display when you're working with children, when you're working with families. Next slide, please. Another thing we've incorporated is family night. So you'll see here is just an example from another slide about my family and my face. And family night is a time to bring families in to share and get to know your families, and where they see school really as their second home. You want school to be that welcoming environment where it's felt like their second home, that they're very comfortable with walking around. You know how you go to some place where you've never been and should I sit, and you're uncomfortable? You don't want school to be that way. You don't want your classroom to be that way. You want your classroom to be, hey, lay back, feel comfortable, because this is their environment, right? This is where we want them to excel. So we want them to always feel that the school is a part of them, that they are a part of the school. And we would not exist if we didn't have them. So we want to make sure that we have a family night, and not just one. You could have one in fall and spring. You can have one monthly, but have that family night where we do activities with the entire family. I cannot tell you, we haven't had a lot since COVID. But before COVID, we would have a movie night. We would have a night where we would have arts. We would have a night where we would bring in science. And we would do things where the families would engage with other families. So that was very helpful for bridging that gap when families are speaking to families who might speak the same language, and having someone that's similar to them. So that's just one example. Next slide, please. Sharing, learning with the family. So part of that is, we have example, you'll see an example here. It's like a puppet show, but having visuals of the children. We do probably yearly. We do the Three Little Pigs. And it's a big production of the Three Little Pigs. Everyone is welcome. We do the drama skit. It's like a whole series of things with the Three Little Pigs, but we're always sharing that with the families. So that is that letter home, right? You see what's called an anchor text. So an anchor text is a book that you are using as the anchor to express for the child to learn language, for the child to engage in multiple ways with that book. So for example, if we were going to do an anchor book, just for sake, The Hungry Caterpillar, we would pick out words that were from the book to start getting children and families familiar with the book. Also, it would be advisable if you can get the book in the family's home language and send it home. That will be very key. Making visuals of the book, have songs and chants that you share with the family about the book. So everything is sort of geared around this book, right? And for example, with the Very Hungry Caterpillar, there's so many things. There's, science, there's math, there's so many things. There's nutrition and eating right with that book, for example. So there's so many activities you can do with that book. Next slide, please. Storybooks in the home language. So you can take backpacks and they could take books home in their home language. They could take backpacks in another language, but these are backpacks that parents can check out. They have the book. They might have things that can go with the book, and children are free to take those things home for a week and then bring it back. So the storybooks in the home language is very important that they see themselves represented in the books, that they see their language represented, they see themselves represented in the classroom. But having that storybooks in the home language shows that you are having a welcoming, open environment for children. Next slide, please. So a sample activity plan, I've just added. So family activity description, describe the activity you will provide for families to promote dual language learners and the home language. Materials for families to explain the benefits of the dual language learners. So you'll have handouts that suggest topics and links to inform parents about the benefits of multiple languages. Describe how this information will be presented to the families, and multilingual activities to support bilingualism in a systematic way, and describe the activities that you plan to offer children in the classroom to connect with the family activity on dual language learners, and what other activities can you do with families and children together to promote DLL and inform families. So just a sample activity plan, always keeping in mind the dual language or the multiple language learner in the classroom, and ensuring that their voice are heard and they are being included in the classroom. Next slide, please. There's an environmental checklist, because remember we talked about families is the key, right? But there's also the environmental checklist and knowing about the daily visual schedule. So you have your schedule. Remember back when you're teaching elementary school or preschool, as I run a preschool, that the daily schedule would be displayed also in pictures. And I always remember that my children in my program, they can't tell time, right? But they know what happens next. So that consistency with children is also important. They know what's supposed to happen after they eat, right? For my students, they know that it's going to the bathroom and nap time. And so it's so really important in that consistency with children, with all children, is available. Family photos, and you're going to see some pictures of some family photos. Visuals in books and materials. And Andy's going to share more about our valuing of books. ensuring that we were drawing music in their spaces and cozy spaces, and that the outside environment looks like the inside environment. And so ensuring that when they walk outside, that there's a place where I can still do dramatic play and dress up outside, right? Making sure that there's still an activity where I can do outside and I could do science, that there's still I can go outside and I could do music and movement, and making sure that when we're doing those things, that inside, outside, that we're making sure that that we are including the culture of each child that's in our program and others, right? And others. Next slide, to expose them to others. So example, family portraits, and you just see family pictures of families that you can share. We have families really get into this. Children like seeing their families when they come in. They like, this is also that take-home activity, and parents get very into it. You're going to see, let me go to the next slide. I think it's the next one. That the teacher, you'll see on this one, where the teacher has the family. And so the family tree and of valuing families, all families. And children, when moms have not bought their picture in of their family, they're like, where's ours? And they look for their family. So it's really important that we have everyone represented. And parents typically will want to share because they see, the other children see that everyone has a picture of their family. And so it's important that we make sure that we're including the family and valuing the family in our programs. Next slide, please. Family blocks, another way, right? So a take-home activity that children do with their families, or we can do at the school, right? On a family night, and make family blocks. So when you're thinking about Itters and Eckers, you have to have some blocks that are made, right? Can't just be from Lakeshore or Education Station or any other program. You have to have, one of them is they have to be blocks that are made. So some people, use cereal boxes and things of that sort. And so they have here, you'll see family blocks, and you'll see that the children's picture is on it. And so this can be expanded, right? Because then you could do stories, right, of the different families. And that way the children get to see their family. So family blocks. And you'll notice that it's in different languages, right? So it's labeled in different languages, and I'll share more about the different languages. Next slide, please. And we just had this, right? President's Day. So making sure that you have the languages represented in your school, and you want to ensure, this is very important, that it's not in a color that might be considered offensive to parents or to a certain culture, because sometimes that happens also. So this was just like previous President's Day, a slide that I got. And so that it shows that the different languages, class will resume, no class, and in the different languages, so that everyone is represented and they know what's going to happen at the school. That communication, that building relationship is important. It's all about relationships. Next slide, please. One color per language. So an example of, we've labeled the classroom, the dramatic play area. And so you'll see that it's labeled, and so that it's labeled with the different languages. And so labeling the classroom with visuals, with words is so very important, so that children begin to see literature. Okay, they can begin to see words. Next slide, please. This is a small puzzle. So it's one word, not lots of pieces, but you can still think of labeling, right? Labeling the puzzle so they know what a rabbit is, a fish is. a cat is, a mouse is, a bird. And so ensuring that we're labeling the classroom, and then also that's what part of Eckers and Itters, right? Labeling the classroom. So sort of best practices. Next slide, please. Just another visual of labeling the classroom. This is an infant toddler class, as you can see, but you'll see that the classroom has pictures, items labeled, and how the classroom can look. Next slide, please. One of the things I didn't add, and I'm thinking as I'm looking back, I didn't add, we need to make sure about dolls also, that they're represented, and that we're not just adding items that were to be considered stereotypical, or when we're celebrating things that we're not using a tourist model, where we talk about it once and it's never talked about again. Adding diversity in the classroom, so you'll just see that items that are diverse, and having items labeled and books of different cultures, and expressing what's important by what we put on our walls, like what's important to us that we put on our walls at home, and what's important to us that we put on the wall in our classroom. Next slide, please. So if you if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. So also with that is, if we have that time, to speak the language of the children that are in our program. Now, that's a lot of you like, but LaTanga, I have 5 different languages in my program. How can I learn 5 different languages? But you are learning. You're probably learning a few words in each. So that's a start, right? Learning a few words in each. Next slide, please. So in conclusion for my section, rich exchange of language happens throughout the day, spontaneous and in the moment, in response to the child. Remember, you're following the child's lead. Expansions and extensions of children responses, effective questioning to check for understanding, show me, point to, repeat, those open-ended questions to get the child talking, right? And child-to-child interactions, like I previously talked about, Miss Mintz putting me with Anna, right? The child-to-child interactions to develop that rich exchange of languages. Next slide, please. Songs and chants. So I was thinking about when Martine was talking about Dr. Seuss. And as a child, I so enjoyed Dr. Seuss books. I was a book lover, still love books. But one of the reasons I had the Dr. Seuss books, and I'm not sure if they do this anymore, you were able to purchase books for a low price. I want to say, I don't even know what the price is, but my mom was able to purchase books, and I would get this new book every month, a Dr. Seuss book. Loved books. And the books were sort of repetitive. So I could like learn Hop on Pop. Yep. I learned What's in a People's House, right? I learned rhyming words. That's Sam I am, that's Sam I am, right? Green eggs and ham. I learned rhyming words from Dr. Seuss books. So with our songs and chants, we make sure that we're embedding some of the key vocabulary words into the song or chant when we're wanting children to learn new words. Highlight, underline the key vocabulary words. Display the song or chant in different areas of the indoor and outdoor environment so they see it and they have a visual representation of that song or chant. If the song or chant is long, start with just a few verses, right? Repetition is key. And they repeat it. And I will have parents come and say, especially when I was a Head Start teacher, they will come back and say, oh, my child sings this song, and parents are wanting to know what that song is. They keep singing this song. And these are my students who were dual language learners. And so send copies of the song home for parents. Remember, if we can send anything home to parents, we want to make sure that we're sending it in their language and in another language if possible, or all languages, that we are being inclusive. Next slide, please. So now I will turn it over to Andy, who's going to share more.
Okay. Thank you so much, LaTanga. I think we've gotten a wealth of information about children's dual language. And next slide, Nancy, please. So I'm going to talk about perception and how we build that into practice. But first, I kind of wanted to do a recap of the past workshops that we had, because I know not everyone has attended all of them. And some of you, thank goodness, have. But for those that haven't, the first workshop was really looking at the perspective on language as it develops with young children, families, and communities, and an overview of language policies and practices. The second workshop was the development of languages and how dual language babies and brain research figures into support children's language and literacy development. And the third one, which was just a week or so ago, was about culturally responsive practices. And that was basically looking at utilizing responsive practices to provide information with an anti-bias, anti-racist, and social justice lens, to model, coach, respect, and understand people and culture. And it was a really wonderful, lively participation that we've had in all three workshops. And we're thrilled that we can, LaTanga and I, to bring you the fourth workshop on literacy and language. So, also in this section of the workshop, we're going to look at what does perception have to do with our practices as educators and teacher educators in terms of organization, interpretation, and identification. And then also, what does this have to do with children's literature? So next slide, please. So perception is the belief or opinion often held by many people and based upon how things seem. It's also the organization, identification, and interpretation of sensory information in order to understand the present information or the environment. So all perception involves signals that go through the nervous system and in turn results in a physical or chemical stimulation of the sensory system. It's not only the receipt of these signals, but it is the person's learning, memory, expectations, experiences, and attention that inform that. So your mind cannot give equal attention to every stimulus that comes in contact with your senses. So we become selective, and this selective aspect of perception is evident from the first day of life, okay? So as a consequences, you don't experience everything in the world. In fact, you pay attention to many of the meaningful perceptions at once. And if you pay attention to too many of the meaningful perceptions at once, then you will experience overload. So I think you probably are all familiar with that, because we all have had that experience with too many things going on and not being able to keep something straight in the process. So, so newborns, we know are look at pattern cards and prefer pattern cards as opposed to plain ones. And infants find complex patterns, such as a face or a checkerboard, to be much more interesting than just one large shape. So, next slide, please. Okay, so human perceptual systems require variation and change in order to function. So when you're exposed to steady static conditions, your sense receptors desensitize. So we almost don't hear something. So since of that stimuli, you tune out, and it remains invisible, and you're astonished when you discover it, you know? So when you're made aware of a new word, it suddenly appears more often. So I think of, you know, when you buy a white car, all of a sudden you see only white cars, you know, and so when you're made aware of that, you know, then we acquire personal meaning for it, and it ceases to stay in the background. It comes to the forefront. So by 4 months of age, babies respond much more frequently to the human face. So from the first moments of life, the human visual system is involved in scanning the environment and selecting what is meaningful. So it makes me think of what's happened with the pandemic. And we've had several years now. And I'm wondering, with all the masks that we had on, what are these young infants really perceiving, and what are they, how is that informing their perception when they can't see the whole face? They're only seeing half of it. And so how are they decoding emotions and inference when it's not present any longer, you know, from that? So sometimes we even correct the stimulus, as in a word appearing incorrect or not noticing it. For words as sentences, understanding comes in globs. So there's a shaded section over to the right of your screen. So would somebody unmute, please, and read that for me?
I can.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Jan.
According to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only well, okay.
Right.
Important thing is that the first and last letters be at the right place. You want me to go on?
Yes, please.
The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. It makes me wonder whether, okay, and now I'm stopping myself, right?
Okay.
Spitting.
It makes me wonder.
It makes me wonder whether, can somebody help me?
Spotting.
Spelling mistakes is at all easy.
Great. Thank you so much for volunteering. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So words, just, you know, think about this in the context of a dual language learner. You know, English to that person or that young child might look exactly like this without being able to decode or encode. And that was talked about in previous workshops, you know, in detail, how the brain functions in that sense. So if you are a fluent English speaker, then you can read it, even though it's tons of mistakes in there, and read it, you know, fluently, you know. stumbling on one or two words is amazing when you think of how many misspelled words there are in this little blurb, from that, So, words direct people's perception. And when you feel you have successfully resolved the problem or understand the problem, you experience closure. You then apply that knowledge to the general meaning based on how you perceive it to be. And when closure is difficult, people feel very frustrated, and they may attempt to reject the situation entirely as a result of that. So perceptions govern the way we see, and how the way we see governs how we behave, So next slide, please.
Sorry, it's not moving. I'm gonna,
That's okay.
there we
There we
go.
go. Nope, wait, I think there's one in between. I think you went too many.
Well, okay.
All right, well, I'll tell you what then.
I'll go to the next. Is this good?
No, it needs to go back to, I believe. It should be like a hashtag.
It only goes back. Let me,
Okay,
this seems,
okay, all right, so stop there. That's fine. I'll go from there. I'm flexible. Anyhow, okay. So community activity that we sent to all of you participants was to create an ideal library. So on the left, you see those were the directions that we asked for you to do. And on the right is a reflection based upon what you submitted. You can still submit, and we would love for you to do that, to build a resource from our community of practice so that we can share this to everyone and that's a participant in these workshops. And they will shortly be, they're all being recorded, and they shortly will be available on Canvas for you to access all the resources that are there. Okay, now you can go to the next one. There we go. Okay, so at this time, we have a wonderful guest speaker with us, Professor Bailey Kaufman from Fordham University, and several other universities that she teaches at, community colleges. And I'd like to introduce her at this time, and she's going to talk about, how we use books and children's literature, not only in the child's classroom, but also in the adult classroom. One of the things I did was to always to use in most of my classes a bedtime story. So at the end of my course, I would use a children's book that I could relate the course content to in order to sum up and maybe give some food for thought for the next lecture that we were going to attend together. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Professor Kaufman, and she'll take over. Thank you.
Hello all, thank you all for having me. I'm so excited to join everyone. So we can go back to the slideshow. So this QR code you're able to access if you want to pull it up on your phone. Alternatively, the URL is in the chat. You can copy and paste it into your browser. So we can go ahead and pull up that slide again for everyone to take a look at. Or if it's easier, I can pull it up. Nancy?
No, I think we can. Nancy, could you pull up the slide that has the hashtag, the
yeah, I would
app
do
on
that.
it? That'd be
I would
great.
do it. I'm trying to get it back in the show. I didn't. Yeah, 1 second.
Okay,
No worries.
no worries.
So once you access that QR code, and we can leave that up for a second so everyone can get that information. And then in a moment, we'll go to the next slide and show you what that looks like. This is a resource that I put together specifically in line with some of my research, which has to do with how we select social justice picture books or picture books that have an anti-bias lens, given all of the systemic inequities and injustices that are happening in our world on a daily basis that consistently affect our youngest learners and our adult learners in teacher preparation programs. It's crucial and critical that we are choosing books that are reflective of our current society, which is to say very plainly a diverse society. So next slide, please. Once you open up that tiny URL or that QR code, you should see a kind of digital library. Every single picture book cover that you see here, you can click on, and that will take you to a YouTube read aloud of that book. A big thing that I've experienced while working in higher education is that it's a wonderful idea to bring in all these materials, but it's extremely unfair to ask our students to buy them. That's a huge issue of equity. Who's able to go out and buy a $15, $20 picture book? Or who has the time to go to the library and peruse the selections to find a book? And it's something that our in-service teachers face on a daily basis with lack of funds, as well as our pre-service teachers who are trying to start their career. So YouTube is a really important tool for us to pass on to our students and use ourselves to increase equity and access to picture books that are diverse. So every single picture book here has a link that you can go to. You're also welcome to keep this link, disperse it to your students, your colleagues. It really is a work that I created to be shared so that we can all access it. Also included on the left is a clickable link for socialjusticebooks.org, which has book lists organized by different categories, as well as an article that is kind of a guide for selecting anti-bias children's books as written by Louise Derman Sparks. So when we think about these children's books, and we can think back 2 slides prior to those questions when we're making our own library as a collective. Nancy, if you can go back 2 slides so we can see those prompts. Something that I found success in is having my community college, my graduate students create a class library. That way they have this resource to then take with them into the field, but also to have our different perspectives. The books that I choose are going to be different than the books that someone else chooses. And when we're thinking about an anti-bias social justice lens, a lot of us tend to bring our own biases into that commentary and think about where we want to see ourselves reflected. Part of that is accepting and acknowledging our biases and saying, yes, sometimes those books are great, but especially thinking about those students who are frequently not represented in picture books. So as you're going through, I want you to think about, what do you notice about the characters? Whose lives are being represented? How does this make the reader feel? And what does this make the reader think? And I think we have enough time. We can even do a quick little exercise before going into breakout rooms. Just think of your favorite book. It could be one from your childhood. I know mine is, or it could be something that you read recently, or something that maybe your students or your children themselves love. Take a second and just picture that cover, or picture a couple pages of the book. Who's represented? Who's the character? Is it an animal? Is it a person? What kind of person? What life does that person have? There's a really great activity. This is kind of off topic a little bit, but there's a really great activity where you have students, mostly college and higher, go through and try and find the statistics on who the main characters in children's books are. And I do that before we do any kind of literacy content with children's books, just so they understand the true hard numbers, which is that the majority of picture books have main characters that are either animals or white individuals. Moving towards newer publications, that percentage is decreasing, but not nearly at the rate we would expect or hope for. So thinking about your favorite one, is that still a good quality book to use? Or maybe you use it in conjunction with other books. I feel like, Nancy, I'm making you do all these gymnastics with the slides, but now if you can go ahead. Thank you. And we'll go past the QR code, past the library. This is for you to use as we go into the breakout rooms, should you need books handy. So in our breakout rooms, we're going to do this activity, and this activity is adopted from Learning for Justice. which used to be called Teaching Tolerance, if anyone has heard of that organization. And Teaching Tolerance, now Learning for Justice, has created these social justice standards that are being widely adopted by different curriculums and even some states. And when we think about these standards, there's a reason we need to have these standardized, especially in early childhood, where every state has extremely different early childhood principles. Having some kind of common standards about what social justice is and how it can be applied developmentally appropriately to different areas of our education system allows us to create better opportunities for our young learners as well as our adult learners. And just as we go into this, the 4 domains that they created based on anti-bias pedagogy and all of that are identity, diversity, justice, and action. And 2 of those we find really often when we talk about anti-bias literature, identity and diversity. We want to have a bunch of different identities present in the pages. We want to show diversity of different cultures. That's all wonderful and needs to be done. Yet the part that's harder to find within children's books, and you have to really work for, is those elements of justice and action and what that looks like within a picture book. And so I encourage you, as we make our cohort or collaborative classroom, think about any books that you've seen that contribute to these ideas of fighting for justice and action within the community. So this activity you're going to do in your breakout room, I've done with students as young as pre-K. The 4 years old, they've been able to tell me, what do you notice about the characters in the book we're reading? How do you think they live their lives? What does this make you feel? What does this make you think? They're all able to answer that. And doing this with adult learners, they do the activity first, and then I tell them that 4-year-olds did this, and there's a little bit of a dissonance, being unable to understand that children are completely capable of this social justice thinking, of this anti-bias thinking. So, looking at the book selections that were in that resource, and we can put the link in the chat again if anyone lost it, you can go ahead and select one of the books that's shown on the screen, or if you have a book nearby, you're welcome to do that as well. And you're going to, in your breakout room, discuss the books you chose and answer those questions. And we can maybe put those questions in the chat too, if we can get them up. But essentially, what do you notice about the characters, their lives, and how does this make you feel, and what does it make you think? And again, if you had already made your or submitted your 3 books, you can also choose from those. Are there any questions before you go out into your breakout rooms? Okay.
So-
Welcome back, everyone. If everyone can go ahead and mute themselves. I know the wonderful thing about Zoom is when we're having fantastic conversations, we come back and we're still unmuted because we want to keep talking. And we're going to get to keep talking. But for now, we'll just make sure we can have everyone muted.
Right.
So, as I heard in some of the discussion groups, I was very excited to hear people bringing in the books that they had already chosen or will be submitting to the list for our collaborative book list. I was also really happy to see people saying, oh, this cover looks interesting, so I wanted to listen to that one. And I saw a couple groups collectively listening to the stories, which was great. There were a few kind of themes, topics, ideas that came up that are really relevant to our work as educators and teacher educators that we can keep in the back of our minds as we're choosing books to support culturally and linguistically diverse learners. And a few points that were made include books that address cultural intelligence and books that are presented in multiple languages. Now, in California especially, but also in the US in general, the books that are published, the majority of bilingual books are English and Spanish. And that's phenomenal because we have a ton of learners who benefit from both of those languages. But something to consider is you're going to have students who come into your classroom speaking languages you may never have heard of. I learned that very quickly when I moved to New York, and I had a student who came in speaking a language that I didn't know existed. And I was like, oh, I'm an educated person. I know what the world is. And I had to check my bias and go, no, I don't. And I don't have materials to support this kiddo. And I couldn't find a book that supported this kiddo. And I wish I could go back and think, oh, I should try and find translations, or do as LaTanga told us and talk to the parents to have them help us with these resources, or with the translator that's required for all materials going home. But being a new teacher at the time, I didn't think to do that. And so especially for those of us who are teacher educators, bringing these strategies into our classes and giving specific examples of how we do this is going to be crucial for this next generation of teachers. The other concept that came about that I think is really important we all think on is this idea of cultural intelligence, and how we're not just thinking about this generic, oh, we need diverse picture books, so we're going to choose a picture book based on the skin color of the main character. That is extremely important to make sure we're representing our kiddos in the books we choose with the main characters. But it goes beyond that. One of the statistics I mentioned that I have my students find, not only how many animals are main characters, but how many characters are just generically illustrated as a shade of brown. And then we call it diverse, without ever giving any sort of background to their cultural identity. And the books that we bring into our classroom can reflect much more than just physical attributes. They can show the entire cultural experience of a group by looking at food, activities, family gatherings, jokes. The humor that we use is different from culture to culture. So those are a few takeaways that I gathered from the different groups. And I would love for everyone to take a moment in the chat to share one takeaway. And we're going to do this a waterfall style. I don't know if anyone's ever done this in their Zoom meetings. So everyone's going to type into the chat, but you're not going to press enter until we're all done and ready to press enter. So we'll take about 2 minutes, and I'll set a timer so I don't stop you too soon. 2 minutes to write a takeaway from your conversations. It could be a direct response to the questions that we asked, or something else that came up naturally in your conversations. And you can type it, hold off on pressing enter until I say so. Go ahead and it will take 2 minutes. You can go off camera if you want, or leave your camera on, whatever you're more comfortable with. Take another 10 seconds, finish up your thought, and then we'll all press enter. All right. On the count of 3, go ahead and press enter. 1, 2, 3. Amazing. I'm glad it worked with everyone. I always love when I get that and the wait time was right. Sometimes I do it with my lecture students and the wait time I can tell was a little too short. When we think about our multilingual learners or dual language learners, that wait time is super important. And so modeling that behavior or that ability to give wait time to all of you. Thank you for participating in that. So we can take a second and scroll through. And something that I'm noticing is that there's a lot of different aspects of identity that are being mentioned. We're mentioning race, we're mentioning gender, we're mentioning ability. We're thinking about how language is a part of culture and cultural intelligence. Looking through your colleagues' comments, also whoever reacted to that, I didn't know you could react to Zoom chat, so thank you for teaching me something on Zoom tonight. As you're scrolling through your colleagues' comments and thinking back on the conversations that you had tonight, I want you to consider your own positions. So whether you're in the classroom with young learners or with adults, and take a second and think about how you could incorporate this, whether into an assignment for your adult learners, into a class conversation, maybe taking some of these books and bringing them into the classroom. Could you translate some of these books for your kiddos? We're going to take another 2 minutes to think about how we could use this in our practice. And then we're going to share out a little bit. So taking 2 minutes, and then I would love for 5-ish, maybe more people to feel brave enough to join our conversation. We're not in class, so I won't resort to cold calling, but I would appreciate anyone who feels brave. So we'll take 2 minutes and think about that. How can you use this in your practice? Take another 10 seconds, and then we'll share out. And while you're gathering your thoughts, I want to thank Carol for putting that in the chat. I also want to acknowledge that I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this idea of intersectionality in relation to picture books real quick. Intersectionality, for those who may not have heard of this, is an idea from Kimberly Crenshaw, about this idea that identity is not just one thing, and that the intersection of multiple identities creates very different lived experiences, especially when we consider society within the United States. That looks very, very different. How someone is treated based on their gender expression, their sexual orientation, their race, amongst other, and language, especially that's considering the content of our talk tonight. All of those identity markers create different experiences and different levels of oppression and different types of injustices that occur. So part of the books that we're choosing is to be intentional in choosing intersectional books that represent those real slices of life, incorporating multiple areas of identity. Also in that vein, I'm going to put in the chat before we discuss the social justice standards I had mentioned earlier, in case anyone is interested in looking at those for their courses or their own practice. What I would love, I think we have enough time for a few people to share out, how can you bring this into your practice? What does this look like for you? Does anyone feel like being brave? Carol got us started, so someone else has to pick it up. Thank you. So modeling, absolutely. When we think about having students identify themselves within materials, that's a very important piece, because it's great, yes, if you bring these things in, but if kids don't make their own connections to it, what's the point? Another brave participant. I know it's a lot to ask after a holiday weekend.
I will share with activities.
How would you bring this into your practice or your career, the population you work with?
First, we read the book, and then I ask the little, because I have 1 to 3 years old. So I asked to do, if we're reading family, I asked to do mommy and daddy and do circles. They do circles. So.
Definitely. And I think you bring up a good point too, which is a lot of times we say, oh, well, little kids, our littlest learners, and 1 to 3 is pretty much as young as we get. Oh, they're not capable. They don't understand. And we have the research to back up that that's a fallacy. Kids completely understand issues of identity and diversity, and they completely understand being able to point themselves out in a book. They'll be the first to tell you if a character looks like someone in the class. And so when we're considering the teachers we're preparing who are going to be with these young children, or ourselves who are currently with young children, a principle of social justice or anti-bias pedagogy is truly believing that kids are capable of this work, as are we. And bringing in the songs, the rhymes, the stories in different languages is super important. I really hope everyone takes that away into their practice, whether you're in the classroom or an educator in general.
I know Donna had her hand up, so just going to bring that to your attention.
Thank you.
I'm not teaching on campus. I'm not teaching at all the language and literature class I was sharing with LaShawn that I really want to, but I shared it with a colleague who is teaching it regularly. But for me, when I teach curriculum now, I'm trying really hard to be selective of what I'm having them look at, and making sure when I'm teaching music and motor, that the music that I'm sharing with them is representational, that I'm not sticking to, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone, the Disney portion, but there are artists that we can share with our students and help them expand their view of what children's music is and how we can represent it, make it representational of everyone. It's not always easy, but I have this I have an older student, she was like before COVID, who is from Iran, and she like twice a year sends me 4 or 5 children's videos. in Persian and that are culturally appropriate, and just all of a sudden, and I have a whole file of them, and most of them are on YouTube, and it's, it's wonderful to do that, but it's, we have to rethink not just the literature that we're doing, but even the artists that I share in the art class. What does that say to children if the only thing we ever talk about are Monet sunflowers? So, I bring in Rengold, I always pronounce her name. She's a mixed media artist.
Faith Ringgold.
Yes, thank you. It's really late at night. She has really beautiful, vibrant colors that everyone wants to show children, but she has a story to tell. So I love this literature, and I'm really my brain is spinning with that.
I'm actually very happy that you brought up Faith Ringgold. So Faith Ringgold does these story quilts, for anyone who doesn't know, which ties great into everything tonight. Thank you, Donna. And I know that Andy has a great example of that in practice, and I'm going to butcher the story, so maybe you'll jump in and finish it up with that, of how this was used in a higher ed setting to convey literacy, of element of diversity in action, as well as art. But backing up super duper quickly, I know we're running out of time. When we think about your comment, you're saying, oh, well, this is for not just literacy, but other areas of curriculum, Donna. You're completely right, because our best practices that we're taught from our very first intro to early childhood class is that curriculum should be integrated in order to be effective. Kids can draw upon different content areas. They don't need to be siloed. And so everything that we're talking about tonight and in this series can really be applied across all content areas. And I think that's really important that we keep that in mind as we take different things from different conferences or presentations or speeches. Everything can be put into different areas. We don't have to keep it in this box of literacy. We can move it across different content areas. So thank you for wrapping that up so nicely for us. I appreciate it. I don't know, Andy, if we have time and you want to explain the Faith Ringgold connection, or if anyone's interested, you can just email her. But
well, I think I can kind of sum it up quickly. But Faith Ringgold wrote a book called Tar Beach, and it was an activity in my literature and language class to literature, where we use children's books to display an extended activity that you could use then in the classroom. And so she made a quilt, and she put the story onto the quilt on one side, and then on the other side, and this was all hand painted. She didn't quilt it per se in the classic, style of quilting. It was painted onto squares, the story. And there were prompts to the story so that children would read the story left to right, and appropriately be able to express their ideas, etc. And the idea she had was to put this story quilt, which was, Bailey, what size would you say it was? 6 by 10, something giant, like 6 by 10, let's say. And each square was easily, very large. Anyhow, to put it down on the floor, to have children around it, and then to read the story from the quilt. Then the other side of the quilt was the picture of the cover that she was able to paint on the front of it. And that was hung in her classroom. And she went on to share with us that she took 4 other books that she felt represented diversity well, and made those into the same type of quilts and put them folded in a corner with a representation of what the quilt was, so that children could take them out and self-select to tell stories to other children. Then the children got so involved in it that they wanted to make their own story quilts. So it became a classroom activity that they contributed 5 more quilts that represented family and their language within the classroom. So it was a really, amazing thing to share with my college students, but also such a rich experience for children as well. So anyways, I know Barbara put in the chat the link for the workshop reflection. We would truly hope that you would be able to find time to fill that out for us. It's not a long survey, but it would help so much in the continuation. We have another workshop coming up. And Martine, I don't know if you wanted to make some announcements at this point, but we are thrilled that you all stayed with us. And I can't begin to thank Professor Kaufman for the wonderful contribution she made to this workshop, and also my partner LaTanga, and all the back people that have helped us through this. So we wish you all well, good health, and that you have a great year. And Martine, did you want to say anything to wrap it up?
Can I jump in just a second before Martine? Since we
Oh
were
yeah,
talking
absolutely. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no worries. Since we were talking about quilts, and I know for
Yes.
those of you in Southern California, the Fabric of a Nation is at the Skirball.
That's right.
All of the quilts, the beautiful quilts, are at the Skirball. And so just wanted to, since we're talking about quilts, and Fabric of a Nation is on tour at the Skirball. So
Right. Remember, we talked about that. I forgot we did talk about that. I'm sorry I didn't mention it.
Well, thank you, Andy. Thank you, LaTanga. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think you rounded everything off, both of you, and I'm grateful for Barbara Rosner, who's posted the workshop reflection. Please complete that. We hope you've enjoyed this evening. And so in the spirit of our topic this evening, I'm going to just share a little rhythm and rhyme of 3 or 4 lines from We're Going on a Bear Hunt, but in German. If you want to join in, you can, but I think children love it. And the message is this: if you can't go, we can't, I'm doing it in German first. It's easier. Drüber können wir nicht, drunter können wir nicht. Oh nein, wir müssen mitten rein. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. Oh no, we've got to go through it. So please go through it. Please share what you can with colleagues around you. And we look forward to seeing you for our next workshop in March. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.